Today I'm going to be getting into how to break free of behavioral patterns. See, so many people in our day and age are stuck behaving in the same mannerisms that they were, and they aren't consciously aware of it. So if you find yourself in that situation, I want you to imagine this. You're on a train. The train is going round and round and round. You've been getting off at a certain stop, and you're accustomed to that stop. It could be the second stop, the third stop. That's the stop that you know. Now, you're running late for work. You've heard that the fourth stop might be the one that takes you to where you're trying to go at a quicker pace. But you're a little hesitant because you're unsure if you'll make it to work. And it's an experiment. There's fear associated with that. You don't know whether or not that final stop will get you to where you're headed. That's typical for most of us. A lot of us find ourselves in positions, in situations where we would have to gamble to get to where we're really headed in life. And so what can you do when you're on that train and you're running late for work? Well, you could gamble and you could risk it. Or you could go with what you know. And what you know has been proven time and time again to be ineffective. We see this in relationships. We see this with other people. We see this with ourselves. When we have a behavioral mechanism at play that doesn't allow us to actually do the thing that we're trying to accomplish. If you look at creative people, for example, oftentimes we need to put ourselves in new surroundings and inhibit and display different ways of creating in order to really find ourselves on the page, on the canvas, or in the story that we're trying to share. And the only way that you actually do that is if you're open to new ways of expressing and exploring yourself. So it can be one of the main ways that, one of the main things that inhibits the creative process is this fear of exploring different parts of yourself. One of the biggest things that inhibits your ability to have relationships with people is certain behavioral patterns that you have not recognized or come to conscious grips with from your past. And so it's really important to see, how am I behaving in the same way, right? Because once you can identify those behavioral traits, then you begin to ask the question of, how can I change them? And I'm going to be getting into this video, so if you're not subscribed to the channel, please do. It goes a long way for me to help make these videos. And also, please leave a like or a comment down below entailing some of your own behavioral mechanisms and some of the things that you display in your personal life. I'd be really interested in hearing those. And so some of the behavioral mechanisms that I'm thinking about here are things like certain people have a tendency to get angry when they respond to a certain circumstance. Let's say somebody breaks in front of them, they drive in front of them, and they cut them off. And you know, because you've seen this person respond in that circumstance over and over again, they're going to cuss, they're going to get angry, they might try to speed, right? That's a very visible way to see how somebody's responding to that circumstance. And now your mind has already associated their response pattern, right, with this person. And you might tell yourself that person is never going to be predisposed to change. They're always going to respond to that person cutting them off in the same way, because it's very unlikely, unless they do the inner work necessary, that they're ever going to associate, right, somebody cutting them off with anything different. Maybe their association of somebody cutting them off is, that person has more of a right of way than me, that hurts my ego, how dare they do that, and so I'm going to speed up. Right. And so you can see how this can become very problematic. Let's say in a relationship, you find yourself behaving in the same way, or your partner's behaving in the same way, and that never changes, or you're in a work environment and you've told somebody for the umpteenth time, like, please get that done, and based on past times that the way that you've communicated that has never got it done, but you find yourself stuck in this communication rut. So how is it that we can face that and change? The first thing I'm going to suggest is facing your fears. Now, that seems very obvious up front, because everybody might be like, hey, I'm cognizant of my fears and I know what they are and I face them. But we have an enormous amount of fears as human beings that we all share. And a lot of them are very averse to risk. A lot of them are averse to taking new positions in different situations and putting ourselves in new situations and and responding to situations in a different way. If you are stuck on that train loop, and and the railroad tracks are like an infinity sign, and you're going round and round and round, and you're saying the same things, and you're behaving in the same way, it can often feel like a lot of life is cyclical, right? And that your being is sort of trapped by its environment. And that's mainly because the constraints, the railroad tracks, are really your own fears. And so it really behooves you to become cognizant of your fears. Because once you become aware of your fears, now you can sort of start to push against the railroad tracks, right? You're not stuck going on that third stop. Maybe you try that fourth stop, and that's what gets you to work faster or gets you to your destination faster. And so when we ask ourselves, like, hey, what are our fears here? Oftentimes they're related to a change of pace, a move, finding ourselves with different people, right? Internalizing certain beliefs about ourselves, that we're not good enough, that we can't create the thing that we're trying to create, that somebody else was destined for that we don't have the skill set. And so we tell ourselves a lot of negative things about our capabilities and our capacities to perform in the world. Some of these get internalized from our parental figures in our lives and from people around us and things from childhood. But also we do a lot on our own part to try to restrict our behaviors and our mechanisms to what is comfortable. Because we truly do fear change, especially if we're in a comfortable situation in our life. Now, if we're in a situation that's not so comfortable, we aren't as afraid to make a big change or a pivotal change because we're in a state of suffering and we're not in a good state of being, right? And so it becomes very critical for us to be very cognizant of what we're afraid of and try to put an effort to changing that. And so one way that you can do that is to say, hey, it's very normal to be afraid, right? It's very, very normal to feel fear about a new situation that you're not aware of. You're running late from work and you don't know whether or not that fourth stop will work out. That fear is normal and it's there for a reason, because what if you go on that fourth stop and now you're 40 minutes late to work? That's a problem. But it's not normal to let that fear prevent you from one day taking that stop, right? It could be on a day when you don't have work and you're curious, like, hey, is this going to be more efficacious for me over the years? And so you really don't want to get in that rut where you fear something, and because you fear it, you don't do it, right? It should be more like, hey, I fear something, and therefore that's worth exploring and investigating. Because, and I was reading this the other day, Jung had a saying, the psychologist Carl Jung, he said, show me what a man's fear is, and I can show you what their next development in life is. And it's precisely because the greatest things that we struggle with, those are our greatest assets for growth. And we have the most potential to grow in those very things. And so another thing I'm going to say is focus on developing your weaknesses. Because if you go along this line in thought process, you realize that as you sort of work on your fears, naturally that these are going to be weak points for you, right? A lot of people, they're not very fearful of things that they're very good at, right? Or things that they believe themselves to be good at. But it's the things that they've been told that they're not so good at, or that they've internalized that they're not so good at, that they're weak at. And so perhaps somebody who finds themselves caught in the behavioral rut of, getting angry at a certain thing is not so good at communication. Or somebody who finds themselves in the rut of, not being non-confrontational, right, is not so good at taking a stance for themselves. And so as you improve on those weaknesses, as you start to take a stance for yourself, as you start to become more confrontational, as you start to outline your boundaries, you'll slowly find yourself developing more wholly as a human being. And that really starts with focusing on your weaknesses just as much as you're focusing on your fears. And oftentimes you'll find that those two things come in tandem, that they're co-aligned. And as you go along this, it helps to have people along with you that support you in that endeavor. Oftentimes we'll find ourselves surrounded by people that fit our ideology, our mold, our identity, and there's nothing wrong with that. But understand that if you're going along the process of self-development, and if you're really trying to face your fears and develop your weaknesses and break out of behavioral patterns that no longer fit, right? the mold of what you're trying to become, whether those are relationship patterns, work patterns, environmental patterns. It's crucial for you to start finding yourself in pockets and niches of people that are going to push you in that oppositional direction, right? Because if I stay surrounded by the same people, then it becomes an echo chamber. It becomes a loop. And you might not necessarily have to go find people in real life, right? You might find an online community. You might find even someone on social media who supports a different position from you, if it's something like political, religious, or something like this. Or it could be just somebody that's going to speak to the very problem that you're having, right? If you're having developmental, like self-development sort of issues, you could go to a self-development channel that's talking about that specific thing, and that could help you. So it's all about finding the right pocket of people that's going to push you in a different behavioral pattern, right? Not finding an echo chamber. And so surrounding yourself with that sort of energy can really benefit you. I hope this video was of help to any of you out there who are trying to break out of certain patterns they find themselves in, whether it's parents, relationships, work, friends, because I truly do believe that we often find ourselves in these patterns because life is very cyclical, and it becomes very difficult for us to have an objective perspective on who we're surrounding ourselves with and who we are, right? And the self that we're putting out to the world. Like I said, if you haven't subscribed to this channel already, please do hit that like button. It goes a long way for this channel, and I'll talk to you guys next time.